Fight. Welcome back to the Two Pointers Podcast. I'm Trevor Everett. Today, before we get into the interview with Hassan Ahmad about his Drew League graphic design opportunity, a couple of things I want to make sure you know. Two Pointers Podcast is presented in part with SeatGeek. SeatGeek is our presenting sponsor. Code 2Pointers gets you $20 off your first purchase. Click the link in the top of the description, SeatGeek.com, or in the SeatGeek app. Make that first purchase. A lot of really great sporting events, bowl games, basketball games, concerts, etc. You get $20 off your first purchase. A nice little gift for somebody for Christmas, as that's in less than 2 weeks as I'm recording this intro. You'll hear in parts, it'll be chopped up a little bit just based on when things were recorded. But at the top, you're going to hear this Hassan Ahmad interview. He was a really, really great time. Go support his work. All of his stuff will be linked in the description below. Then I re-ranked the ACC, and then at the end, I was going to do the Draymond thing as an open because it was short and sweet, but I decided to put it at the end a little bit because the NBA topics just sometimes, until later into the year, I don't have a ton more to say. And that was the pressing topic at the time. So thank you guys again for the support. Don't forget to follow Two Pointers on all social media platforms and enjoy the interview with Hassan. All right, I'm joined today by Hassan Ahmad. We found each other a few years ago doing, I think it was TikTok or something. Social media has done its job, is my point. Some incredible work. And if you're watching this on YouTube, whether that's at the beginning of this episode or the end, I'll put some of my favorite designs that he sent me on the screen here. Celtics fans, Grizzlies fans, you'll be kind of excited about them. And then there's a KD one as well I'll throw on here. First of all, introduce yourself, where people can find your work, and then we'll kind of get into some questions I have for you to kind of talk more about some exciting stuff coming up for you.
For sure. Thank you, Trevor. I appreciate it. You can find my work on the headlines on Instagram and TikTok. My @ is Designed by Hassan. On Twitter, it is Designs by Hassan. So Designs and then by Hassan. And then just a little bit about myself, how I got into this. I started way back in 2014 at a very young age. I'm currently 20 years old, based out of Toronto, Ontario, Canada. Really, I just started off by making graphics on an iPad and just like all these different mobile apps. And then from there, and through posting all my graphics onto Instagram mainly, that's what I was on at the very beginning. From there, I eventually made the switch to Photoshop back in 2017. In 2017, I really got into things like photo manipulation, learning how to do graphics with color correction, color grading. Eventually from there, I learned how to do jersey swaps. My jersey swaps at the beginning were not that good, but as time went on, just continuing to improve, really just, I'm surprised myself that I was able to kind of stay consistent. On Instagram, I have quite a lot of posts, but yeah, as time went on, really just been trying to gain more experience. I've been very lucky to do some freelance work for clients within the NBA, NFL. And yeah, just currently searching for the next opportunity in sports.
Yeah, look, you think of this as kind of a soundboard for hopefully an opportunity, but talk to me about, you mentioned the athlete relationship there in the NBA and the NFL. Think back to your first one, now that we know you've been doing this a long time. Tell me about your first time that somebody, or like whether it's a team or a player, interacted with it. Like, is there one that stands out? Maybe if there wasn't a first one, but talk about the first time that was kind of like, it had to be like a oh my gosh, this is kind of a real thing now moment. Was there a team or a player that stuck out maybe early on that you were like, oh, I cannot believe, I know you tag, you're very good at tagging people in that stuff, and I know that there's some engagement there. So
Sure.
Talk to me about that first time.
Yeah, it's a good question. I would say the NFL, and honestly, even the NCAA, that was probably the biggest one for me, because it was just the athletes reaching out directly to me about where they're going, and just kind of getting me to make a committed graphic for them. And really, to me, I just kind of found that crazy, because no matter what school they were committing to or going to, just to kind of make a graphic for that player, and even making a jersey swap for that player to go to such a big school like that it's crazy to me, because even in Canada, like college sports in general is not really that big. So to kind of just, make a graphic like that really stood out to me, especially at the beginning. And then for that to kind of transfer on to the professional leagues was even more crazier, especially because that was more of not through the athlete themselves, but more through, their agents or, people who manage these players. And I'm like, wow, like, can't believe I'm doing this.
Yeah, look, and you think about like when people think of graphics and things like that in the college basketball world specifically now, they think of like a Joe Tipton, right? Like that's the guy that's kind of, he's almost like half reporter, half graphic designer now, and it's almost like
Exactly.
this
Yeah.
weird mesh. But is that the goal ultimately? Is that the goal to do something like that, or is it more of? I mean, look, you're obviously talented at what you do. Is the goal more of like somebody's social team or some kind of like something for a player specifically, or some kind of goal that you have at the end of this?
Yeah. So as of lately, for me, it's really been like you can tell, like I make a lot of NBA stuff, but really I'm open to all sports. I always tell myself that I want to land a graphic design job, with this team or that team or in this league or so and so. But um, regardless, I'm open to any opportunity. I from what I've seen from other designers, I've noticed that they start in the NCAA or college sports at the very beginning, and really, I think I would love to do something like that, especially because you know students, they tend to, if they're doing graphic design, they'll reach out to their own school's creative department and really just kind of use that as a beginning factor. For me, it's always been freelance. So I think just starting off small with certain teams here and there should probably be what I'm trying to pursue at first. But if any other opportunities come along the way, then, I'm definitely open to that.
I mentioned a little bit earlier about any Pacific player like or somebody on social media reaching out to you, right? Is there somebody that is a dream client? There's somebody you're like in the NBA maybe because that's a very popular one there. Is there somebody where like if they saw your work and they asked for a follow up or something? I don't know. Like I really don't know how this industry works. I'm learning from you, but is there
Sure.
somebody out there that you just like would be elated that they wanted to work with you?
Man, I would say Derrick Rose is my favorite player. So if
Nice.
somehow, yeah, him or his agency in a way got to reach out to me for a graphic, both on or off the court, I would love to do something like that.
Look, Derrick Rose is not exactly in his young MVP form anymore, and I'm assuming a retirement announcement will have to come eventually. I know that's sad for you as a
Yeah.
fan, but I'm sure someone's going to have to make something for that. So, hey, maybe this is an opportunity out there. Talk to me a little bit more. You mentioned in the beginning, like 2014, coming on 10 years now, right? Doing this. So, talk to me a little bit more about like what was the motivation to do this? Like, was there any kind of thing that sparked it? I know you had mentioned like Instagram and stuff very early on was like a good platform for it, but was there something that was like, I really enjoy this? And I know you said that there was, took you a while to transition to Photoshop and get really better with it with anything else, right? It takes time, but was there any kind of motivation or a reason that you were like, this is really cool, I want to do this?
Yeah, definitely. I've always felt like this was something that it was like this is a hobby that kind of turned into a career type of thing. Especially when I was so young, when I was starting out to do it. Really, it was just something for fun. And I'm not even gonna lie, like even until 2017 and onwards, when I was in like high school at that time and making these graphics, I didn't really think that I could make it a career until I really just landed my first freelance work. And, I guess that really made me want to pursue this as a career. Just knowing that if you, continue to be consistent and continue to really just improve your work and, land clients, clients can refer you to more clients or, you can just keep on showcasing your work. Really, that's what I'm big on too. Just um, from Instagram, going on to Twitter, going on to Threads, going on to TikTok, especially. just continuing to showcase my work and notice the new demographics that I can go to really just kind of pushes me to make this more of a career and what I want to do onwards.
All right. Well, so we've been through a couple of really good things there. Let's talk about the opportunity that you mentioned, freelance, and every opportunity is super important, right? Let's talk about, the reason that kind of sparked my interest to talk to you about it more because, like I said, I've been following your work for a long time. But the Drew League isn't the NBA, but the Drew League's not your average, like, park league in the middle of nowhere in the
For sure.
Midwest, right? This is obviously a really big deal. If I remember correctly, it's been around for, uh, you know, 40 plus years or something like that, right?
Yeah.
So, first of all, how did the opportunity come up? For those who don't know, I guess you should probably tell it anyway. I know what happened, right? You had the opportunity to make a graphic for the Drew League that ended up on the Los Angeles Metro system and stuff like that. Super crazy stuff. So I guess talk about the opportunity, what came about it, or how it came about.
Yeah, it's crazy. I'm glad that you asked because the whole process of it was interesting. Basically, Cam, someone from the True League, reached out to me, or he had a posting on Twitter, not this year, but in 2021 or 2020, about some graphic design work. And I remember I had reached out to him on Twitter about it. I sent him my portfolio and everything. And he didn't end up replying, just in the assumption that, they found someone already. So I was like, okay, that's fine. And then 2 years later, this random summer day in June, he reached out to me and was like, "Hey, are you down for some more work?" And so we hopped on a call, and it wasn't for the Drew League directly, but more of something for his company. So I was like, okay. He told me about his company and what he wants done, and I was like, okay, yeah, I'm open to that. And he was still doing some stuff for the Drew League as well because he was like one of their main guys, but he was also doing this stuff with his company on the side. But he still mentioned that the Drew League needs some work through a sponsor, like a direct sponsor with the Drew League called Crossover Collective. And he said they need a train wrap graphic for the Los Angeles Metro train. And I was like, damn, this sounds crazy. But I was like, yeah, sure. Just let me know the client's information. He gave me the client's information. Steph Rollins of Crossover Collective worked closely together with him on making this graphic come to life. When I got to see the graphic in person, that same day, I also got to meet him in person. And we had a really great conversation. Just, it was crazy, honestly. Even during the graphic, I don't even think I told anybody this, but one day in, or like one day in on working on the graphic, I was telling myself, I don't know if I'm gonna even be able to, actually do this. Like I thought the project was gonna fall through just because my computer, it couldn't handle the graphic. Like it was crazy, but somehow we still made it.
Look, as somebody who, until I was able to get this MacBook that I'm on right now, I can chop out a podcast no matter the length in less than an hour. But in the past, I was having to do, video edits on my wife's old college computer just to get these things done. And like,
Yeah,
I get it. Like, I would go to bed and like it'd be like 3.5 hour export time remaining. I'd be like, all right, cool. I guess the pod will just go out on Wednesday now or on Thursday or whatever. That's actually how the Wednesday schedule came about for the show. And I know this as we're recording this on a Friday afternoon. It's actually going to go up on Friday afternoon,
okay, cool.
but normally, like I used to record on Mondays with my old co-host, and I'd be like, "Look, I need all of Tuesday to like edit, post it, have time for it to export." So, like, I totally
Yeah.
get it with the computer. Um, maybe you can't say this publicly, but I assume you'll be in attendance for the Drew League this year in some form or fashion. Hopefully on their dime.
I'm hoping so, yeah. Like to see one of the games or
Of course, yeah, or all of them. I don't know, man. The Drew League's a big deal. I mean, look, people don't know
yeah.
DeMar DeRozan, big guy from LA that goes to it almost every year. If I remember, LeBron played in it a few years ago and had a run
He
in with
did,
some
yeah,
dude, and dude like blew up on Instagram because he like tried to talk to LeBron. It is what it is, right? But it's an unbelievable environment. Hopefully, it's something you'll be able to attend.
for
Like
sure.
I don't have anything else about the opportunity or anything like that written down, but I do want to ask you since you're into Toronto, are you a Raptors fan?
I am. It's been kind of tough.
That's what I wanted to ask about. 10-14 right now as we're recording this. Scotty Barnes, I think, is an unbelievable player. Actually, I think he's just to give people an idea of how impactful his at least statistics have been. He's top 10 in the ESPN fantasy rankings for total points, which is awesome. It means he's been productive. What do you want from this year? Do you want a team that could, next year's draft or this year's draft, people have been calling it weak, but I think it's actually a really good draft for how deep it really is going to be with a lot of talented college players. Would you rather, try to win a couple more games here before the All-Star break and then tank it out, the rest of the way? Or are you like hey, we've got enough talent that I think we can win and at least win a playoff series?
Man, I think we try our best to win some games, but if not, we should definitely tank. I want to see a trade. I feel like a lot of people have mentioned like Pascal OG, they've been in trade rumors, I guess. And I don't know, like I'm still trying to think about who I would want to stay because it's tough because OG himself, he's been in so many trade talks in the past. And I guess he's just so valuable that, we didn't include him in trade talks for when we wanted Kevin Durant or when we wanted to get Dame. So
they supposedly turned down 3 first-round picks for him multiple times.
Yeah, I still can't believe
that. I'll ask you this: are you? I know the guy won you a title in 2019. I'm completely aware of that. But are you a Masai Ujiri guy, or are you like I'm out at this point?
I feel like I'm out now. I've always liked Masai before, but
yep.
I don't know. I feel like sometimes you got to pull the trigger. Like, Scotty, I understand now, especially with how he's playing now. I think he's definitely here to stay, but definitely should test out Pascal and OG's value. Because it seems like from the rumors that I've seen, I saw one just this morning too, that the Kings might be a team. Like they might try to flip either Pascal or OG for like Keegan Murray. Really, it just seems like we're trying to go for young guys. And, if that's what we got to do, then just give us multiple at least.
Yeah, look, I mean, this is the same guy. I mean, again, I mentioned the title, right? But you mentioned not pulling the trigger on trades, but, he knows what he's doing at the end of the day. Like, he's definitely put the team in a position over the last 10 years or so. And obviously, it just depends on the timing. But, yeah, I think they'll be fine. I think it's a dedicated fan base, as you absolutely know. So, all right. So rounding out a couple things here. Again, I'll have some images on the screen. Definitely want to make sure the portfolio is out. I think there's a link as well. I'll share in the description. But again, let people know where they can find you. Anything that you might be working on coming up, or just whatever you want to say on the way out.
Yeah, for sure. So on Instagram and TikTok, you can find me at Design by Hassan. Twitter, Designs by Hassan. What I'm working on next, really, I just have one more graphic planned out for the end of the year. Then I'm just going to post my yearly, like, wrapped type of graphic for 2023. John Morant is coming back soon, so I figured I might make a graphic of him. So you could probably expect that in the next week, probably Monday or Tuesday, one of those days. I'm pretty sure he's returning on one of those games as well. But yeah, overall, really, I've just, you can check out my work on Instagram, TikTok. I've been very active on TikTok, just trying to make tutorials and really just help out new designers or designers in general as much as I could. On my TikTok, you can find some tutorials on how I do my backgrounds, how I pick out my fonts, which fonts I use for my graphics, how I do my lighting, how I do jersey swaps. And yeah, that's all I got.
Quickly, I forgot to write this one down earlier, and you mentioned this a little bit about the TikTok, tutorials and things like that. Do you have any advice for any graphic designers that are listening? Any colleagues out in the space that might be, newer to this, maybe following your work and they're checking the show out? Hopefully, any advice for anybody? Again, you have every bit of the right to be able to say anything you want about it because you've been doing this for so long. any advice for anybody that might be doing this that they may not know that could be really helpful for landing something like the Drew League?
Yeah, for sure. So this is going to be like, I guess, pretty straightforward, but honestly, just try not to give up, really. A lot of designers reach out to me for tips and stuff on how, they can make stuff better. And really, like my beginning stuff is not good at all. It's going to be tough to find that one graphic or one style that's going to, automatically, make yourself better. It wasn't even for me, it wasn't until the past like year or two where I really feel like I developed my own style into something that I like to make. And so really, even if what you're putting out is not something that you might like or you might not find that turns out well, just keep on putting it out. I feel like you shouldn't have to worry about quality over quantity right away. Um, just keep on putting stuff out and then gradually you'll improve. And yeah, just, try to stay as motivated as you could.
Awesome. Look, thank you for the time today. 20 minutes is what we asked for, and this is what we ended up doing. On my screen, it says 1958. So
Hey,
thank you again for the opportunity to talk to me today. And then check out all of your links and everything below. Socials for him will all be below in the description. The work, like I said, the portfolio. Please go drop Hassan a follow. Thank you for coming, my friend.
yeah, thank you, Trevor. Appreciate it.
So a couple really great things to talk about today. Like I said, I want to re-rank the ACC because I think it's I think the league is better this year. And again, I'm a homer as somebody who lives in Tobacco Road area. I'm going to obviously be more fond of the ACC and its prowess, but I do want to talk about overall what the ACC looks like, what it's going to need from some of the NCAA tournament stuff later in the year. Overall, where the balance of the league is. I had a conversation similar to this last year with Riv on the pod as well. So definitely want to revisit this idea. I think it's interesting on the timing of it. So just a couple things to note there. I'm actually going to work my way backwards. I'll start at the back because of what happened last night. As I'm recording this, Louisville lost to Arkansas State out of the Sun Belt, who was 3-7 going into that contest. To review really quick before we get into it, coming into the year in the ECB magazine, I did my ACC projections for the standings. I definitely was wrong about some stuff. Don't get me wrong, right? I had Notre Dame 15th. I had Boston College 14th. Virginia Tech 13th. Louisville 12th. I expected a bit of a jump. I think I liked some of the younger talent more than I thought. And then you had some Corin Davis situations, the Tyler Johnson thing with the tights here in the last couple of weeks. I mean, everything's falling apart there in Louisville. But Pittsburgh 11th, or Pitt. Florida State 10th. Syracuse 9th. And then you'll notice a theme. My top 8 is exactly the same as it was, but in a different order. Georgia Tech 8th. They had the big win against Duke. We'll talk about that in a minute. North Carolina 7th. Virginia 6th. Clemson, who we'll talk about in a little bit, is going to be 5th. Wake Forest 4th. NC State 3rd. Miami 2nd. And Duke 1st. That was what I had coming into the year. You know what? I've talked about Clemson pods before. Let's actually start the other way around. I'll go from the top down because that's what people really care about, right? The winning. So Clemson is the best team in the ACC right now, and I don't think it's a question whatsoever. Clemson is 9-0 as I'm recording this. I've got the standings here just to make sure I don't miss anything on some of the numbers. In conference play, they're 1-0. Obviously, some teams have started off, all teams have played at least one conference game so far. But Clemson is 9-0. They have big wins over South Carolina. They won the Asheville Championship, which looks less good now because of the Maryland resume overall. But UAB and Davidson were two really good teams in that tournament as well. So they win the Asheville Championship. They have the win over Boise State very early on in the year that I really like. I think that a win will age better, obviously based on what Boise State will look like later in the year. They also have wins at Alabama in the ACC SEC Challenge, and then they beat TCU on the 9th. So look, they have a really tough challenge here in the next couple of weeks. They play at Memphis. They play Queens at home on the 22nd. They play Radford, which is a tough team in the Big South. And then they begin a bloodbath of a schedule to start the year at Miami, home against North Carolina, at Virginia Tech, home against Boston College, Georgia Tech, at Florida State, at Duke, and Louisville at home to end out January. So the ACC is not going to be easy for them this year, but I do think that this is a really tough team that will withstand the test of time. We shouldn't have any problems with the NCAA tournament berth here with the Clemson Tigers, barring some major collapse. PJ Hall is the ACC Player of the Year right now. I don't think that's close. I think he's the best player in the league. His inside-outside game is unbelievable. They've got an X factor and a guy named Ian Shefflin. I'm probably mispronouncing that slightly, but that kid can rebound. He had 17 or 15 rebounds, something like that, against Pitt, at Pitt, and then he had a ridiculous game against South Carolina. He had 12 and 12. So they've got guys all up and down the floor. Chauncey Wiggins is really good as well. Gerard is obviously the big transfer name that's been one of the most underrated coming from Syracuse. Clemson's the best team in the league, and it's not even close, I think. So shout out to Clemson, who, again, I felt like I was fair with 5 because I didn't know how deep the talent really was, and I'm willing to admit that. Number 2, I have North Carolina. I think it's Clemson, and I think there's a gap. And then I think there's a gap from 2 until you get to like number 7, 8, which is what I said coming into the year. Looking at the ECB ACC standings page, I think the teams on the left were all NCAA tournament teams, and the teams on the right were not. So North Carolina is the second team right now for me in terms of re-ranking the ACC. I think I was wrong about some of the depth. I know that these guys coming in from all over the place. Harrison Ingram's been better than I even imagined. Paxton Woj is somebody that I wasn't super keen on coming into the year. Cormac Ryan is an incredible shooter who I think is starting to find himself a little bit. They really showed it out in the Bahamas for the Atlantis Championship. Northern Iowa, they had some scares there, and then they hit a bunch of threes down the stretch. Villanova was a 2-point loss in overtime against a really good Villanova team, I think. And then they were able to beat up on Arkansas, who eventually will get really good. Their most impressive win, without a doubt, is Tennessee. They beat Tennessee at home in Chapel Hill, 100-92. I don't think I have to go back and look when the last time a Rick Barnes team gave up 100 points. It probably hasn't been recently. That Connecticut game was, I think, really strong showing from them. They've got the State Farm Classic against Kentucky in 2 days. As I'm recording this, you'll get to hear this preview or this conversation right before that game the day before. But really tough run here schedule for them. Beat Florida State. That was a confident win coming off the Tennessee win. If you're a Carolina fan, you would have liked to see them beat UConn, but I mean, it was Madison Square Garden. They call it Stores South for a reason. And then they have some pretty interesting non-con wins earlier in the year. Specifically, I like the win against Radford as well. North Carolina, I think Elliot Cadeau has been the biggest difference. I'm not going to sit here and break down every single team's thing I'm impressed or I was wrong about, but I have to say Elliot Cadeau, as a 19-year-old, he plays a lot more mature than that. He's your Carolina point guard, right? He's gonna do the right things, get guys in space where they need it. They've been using Harrison Ingram as this back to the basket, allowing Baycott to be a better rebounder and be available in the post whenever Harrison Ingram can create. It's been an unbelievable thing to watch. It's been an awesome, awesome team. I've gotten to enjoy them despite some of my allegiances, maybe as a fan sometimes. But North Carolina is one of the best teams in the ACC, which is why I have them ranked at number 2. Number 3 might surprise people a little bit. I have Miami. I still think Miami is a good team at 7-2. I'm not overreacting to their pretty. I wouldn't call it embarrassing, but they're drubbing at Kentucky. That's Rupp Arena is one of the hardest places to play in the country. They did lose to Colorado pretty poorly, 63-90 in Brooklyn on a neutral court without Cody Williams on the side for Colorado. I think Miami's figuring themselves out. I think they're a team that took advantage of their run later in the year. They really, really got good in February last year, which helped propel them in their Elite Eight run the year before, and then their Final Four run, of course. Got to see them in the Final Four last year. I also saw them in the Dean Dome in February last year as they were really figuring it out. Norchad Amir was coming into his own. Obviously, Nigel Pack and Isaiah Wong and all those guys were just playing unbelievable, obviously earning ACC Player of the Year odds there for honors there for Wong. But Miami's a team that definitely gels and figures it out later in the year, and I don't think that's a bad thing. Some of their losses do scare me, obviously, knowing that Kentucky loss was a big blowout in Colorado, but they've taken care of business otherwise. I mean, they beat LIU by almost 50 at home. They beat Kansas State in the Bahamas. They won the Bahamas championship pretty convincingly. Kansas State and Georgia there, 91-83 against Kansas State, and then 79-67 against Georgia. So, and then no other win really worth mentioning there. So, look, I think, and they've got a schedule coming up that they're not going to really prepared for conference play. The only game they've played is Notre Dame, and that was in Coral Gables. But they have LaSalle, Stonehill, North Florida, and then they have to play Clemson, at Wake, home Louisville, at Virginia Tech. So they have a couple of tough games to start the new year in the ACC play. I'm not worried about Miami. I think they'll figure it out the further we go along in the SEC schedule. Not overreacting again, but Duke is number 4. I know people are kind of writing the Blue Devils off because they don't really have a signature win, and their signature win has been that Michigan State win, which has now been downgraded to a quad 3 win because of Michigan State's performance this year. So obviously they lost to Arizona, second game of the year. You have to throw some of that stuff out, but Arizona looked really impressive in it. That Michigan State game, they struggled offensively. The game was really physical. Michigan State really took it to them in that regard, and they were able to respond and at least get the ball in the basket enough to get the game. They lost at Arkansas in the ACC Challenge, a game that I thought a lot of people thought they had. At Georgia Tech, look, I'm not saying Georgia Tech is the easiest place to play in the world, but I think that's I think that speaks more to Georgia Tech and how I've thought about them and how Stoudemire's got those guys playing. Still not a game you want to lose if you're Duke, if I'm being honest. Charlotte, they played at home, and then Hofstra had them up against the wall in the first half the other night in Durham. So, I mean, they haven't had a true test of a game since at Arkansas a few weeks ago. So, their next game is against Baylor in New York. That's going to be a really big game for them. They're going to really have to win that one if they really want to get their feet wet and kind of start to get the wheels turning again heading into conference play. After that, they'll play Queens 10 days later at home, a tough-coached Grant Leonard team that lost to App State at home last night, first non-con loss for Queens in a while. And then they have a pretty easy going to start the ACC year, which we know isn't always the case. They do have Syracuse at home, at Notre Dame, at Pitt, home Georgia Tech, which we know is a game that they can lose. So, and then Pitt at Louisville. Their first real tough game that's not Georgia Tech in ACC conference play doesn't come until the 27th when they play Clemson in Durham. So, a lot of really tough games there once it goes into February. I think Duke's going to be fine. You're seeing Jeremy Roach start to get comfortable with the offense. I know Tyrese Proctor has been completely MIA. Sometimes Mitchell offensively, keeping him on the floor is really, really tough. John Shire's a really good coach, and I stand by that, and I think those guys are going to figure it out without any problems. I think this is something that Duke needs this early on in the year to kind of give themselves some true adversity. I think the Baylor game will surprise people if they can hit their shots. Let's go to number 5. I have Virginia. They have 2 of the best defenders in the conference, if not in the country. Ryan Dunn is unbelievable coming into the year. I had him, boys, as a sleeper, got to break out kind of thing. A lot of people did as well. He's one of the best defenders in the entire country, and that's not an overstatement there. Reese Beekman is obviously a leader of their offense as well. Virginia has had a very good year so far under Tony Bennett and company. They're 8-1. They don't really have a win that I'm floored by. I know the Texas A&M one was really strong because they held them to 47 points, but A&M was also missing, I believe, 2 or 3 starters that game. I think their Memphis game on the 19th will be a game that they can really prove it. That Memphis team has been really good despite some of their guys being out as well. They beat West Virginia. They lost to Wisconsin in Fort Myers, Florida, in a little tournament there. Look, that Florida game by 3, that was really early on in the year. I think Florida's going to figure things out. So Virginia, I think right now, I like what I'm seeing from them from their typical Tony Bennett style defense. But otherwise, they don't have a consistent scorer that I really am excited about, which I think kind of speaks to all of the stuff I said coming into the year, which is why I had them ranked 6th. I knew the defense was going to be good, but outside of the way they typically play, where they get stops, they get deflections, they get turnovers in transition, I just don't see enough guys, McKinley or however you say his name, 12.9 points a game, Beekman at 11.6, and then after that it's a drop-off down below into double figures. I don't love the team offensively, and I think that's going to really hurt them in some of these games. If they're going to control the pace, it's going to be the same thing where it's how Furman beat them last year. They spread 5 out, they hit threes, teams in the ACC are going to be able to beat them, right? Like these teams with heavy guard rotations that are strong, like North Carolina, like NC State. Wake, I think, is going to give them an unbelievable problem there with Kevin Miller and Hunter Salas. I think those guys are going to tear Virginia apart. So I do still think Virginia is the 5th best team in the conference right now. Quickly at number 6, I'll actually be seeing this team next week against St. Louis in one of their last non-con games of the year. NC State, this team's starting to figure things out. MJ Rice has looked really, really good in the last couple of weeks as he's returned from some personal leave of absence time. DJ Burns has been good as always. Got a chance to catch them in a game very early on this year against Abilene Christian. Look, that BYU game could have definitely torn them to shreds from just how that game fell apart. I think they handled that adversity well. They're 7-2. Their only real losses are the BYU game, like I mentioned, and then at Ole Miss was just a drubbing of a game for them. They 20-point loss, couldn't hit the side of a barn. Couldn't hit water if they jump out of a boat, whatever expression you want to say. Definitely played a few, tough games here. I can't call at Boston College the easiest game in the world. Their prove-it game is going to be on Saturday as we're recording this. They play Tennessee in the San Antonio, whatever game that's called. I don't know. It's in San Antonio, Texas. I can't really say it's going to be a neutral court, don't get me wrong, but a lot closer to Knoxville there, but still a short flight away. I think if NC State fans could show up for that game being after finals are over and things like that, I think that'll be a game. If they can beat Tennessee like North Carolina can and did, I think that'll be a game that puts them on the right track heading into the next couple of weeks. They play St. Louis on the 20th. Like I said, I'll be in Raleigh for that one. They play Detroit Mercy as of right now. I don't believe has won a game yet on the 23rd in Raleigh. And then they go at Notre Dame. And the reason I think they should get that Tennessee win to get the momentum going is they play home back-to-back against Virginia, North Carolina, at Louisville, and then they play home Wake, home Virginia Tech, at Virginia, at Syracuse, and Miami at home to end January there. Really, really tough slate of games in a row that I think they'll need the momentum for. My next team, I just mentioned them, is Wake Forest. Wake Forest is number 7. I've had a chance to see this team up close and personal. I think more than any other team on this list, actually, because I saw them 3 times in Charleston for the Charleston Classic, which, look, all the problems there aside because of depth and guys hurt and Efton Reed not having his waiver, all that stuff. I got to see him against Florida. They came out without Efton Reed against Florida, and they dominated that game. I wouldn't say the entire way throughout. They did against Rutgers without a doubt. He was a difference maker against Rutgers. Efton Reed being back for them. He's an unbelievable passer as a big. He's a true 7-footer, but his mobility at that size is unbelievable. Hunter Salas has been playing like an all-ACC first-team type of player when those shots are going in. Kevin Miller's the guy I had predicted from this team to be the all-ACC first-team or second-team player. He's been unbelievable lately. He's starting to hit his stride, or sorry, I should say Boopy Miller, as he's famously called in Winston-Salem. I think this team is figuring out. Coach Steve Forbes is an unbelievable coach, and I think he's got these guys getting ready at the right time as they begin ACC play fully here in a couple of weeks like everyone else. So number 8 is Georgia Tech to round out my top 8. That was the same top 8 as I had before. Georgia Tech has the big win against Duke. I think Coach Stoudemire has got these guys, unbelievably prepared for some of these big games. I think their 5-3 record doesn't speak for kind of the way they're getting themselves figured out. They beat Mississippi State as well at home, which was a big win for them. They lost that game at Georgia. That's a rivalry game. It's in Athens, but that Georgia team's really good this year, even in the SEC, where I think they might struggle later on in SEC play. I do like that Georgia team. They lost at Cincinnati pretty horribly, 89-54. UMass Lowell was only a 3-point loss in Atlanta. I know that game looks it looks bad, but then you realize UMass Lowell is one of the best teams in their conference this year. They beat Howard, who's going to be one of the best teams in their conference as well. And then Georgia Southern to open the year. Georgia Southern hasn't won a game in the Sun Belt. I think this team has its highs and it has its lows, which is why I think they're a teetering team in the ACC for that final. If we were to get more than 7 teams in for some reason, which I don't think is, I think it's 7 or nothing this year. I think there's a way for them to get in, but it's these big wins like the Duke game. Pulling that one off early in the year at home is an unbelievable game that you're going to need for your resume. That should hopefully stay a quad 1 for the rest of the year. They have a pretty easy going schedule until they go back to play Duke at Durham, like I mentioned earlier, at Clemson after that, Virginia at home, Pitt. They've got a really tough to kind of win a few of those or pick some of those off, which I definitely think they can do. Also, Miles Kelly is an unbelievable player. I keep saying that. Number 9 is Boston College. Boston College, Quentin Post is an unbelievable talent for them. Boston College they played NC State. NC State got the win in that one. Look, they've played teams like Richmond. They've won that game. Harvard's one of the best teams in the Ivy. That Colorado State loss, albeit on a neutral court, looks a little bit better now because Colorado State was obviously very highly touted here. Really, their big win, I guess I would call it right now, is St. John's probably. 86-80 in Brooklyn. So I guess you could call that a home game for the Johnnies. But I think Boston College they're deep enough. I think they're talented enough where I think they're going to figure things out. Obviously, Quentin Post is an unbelievable player. He had almost a triple-double the other night in the St. John's game. But thinking about some of the way they play their offense through him a lot, obviously you're going to be really relying on him on both ends. He leads them in points, rebounds, blocks. What they get outside of him, they've got 3 really great scorers there in Claudel Harris and Jaden Zachary as well. This Boston College team isn't, albeit super deep. I do like some of the guys on their bench. McLaughlin has been really good for them as well defensively, but I think this Boston College team, you're completely relying on Quentin Post, and that's okay because when you have one of the best players in the ACC, that's you're always going to have a chance every single night, and we saw that against St. John's, who obviously has teetered as a pretty poor defensive team lately. But I think Boston College, albeit they may not have the depth and the defensive prowess to play the whole ACC schedule out and be really good, but I think they're going to be able to compete because they have a really tough team. Rolling through these next couple ones, Pitt. Look, Carrington's been unbelievable for Pitt. I talked on a podcast with Riv. I couldn't get the name out. With Riv on his podcast on Pick Aside, I talked about Carrington and what he's done offensively as a shot creator. He's obviously carrying that team, honestly, at this point on his back. But all right, at number 10, I have Pitt. Look, I talked with Riv on Pick Aside and his podcast over there, how good Carrington's been for them. I told him I wouldn't be lying if I said I watched their first couple of games. Not necessarily against stellar competition, but I think Pitt's starting to figure things out. I'm a really big fan of Coach Capel. They play one of the worst teams in the country in A&T. They had 4 straight games at home to start the year. Binghamton, Florida Gulf Coast, Jacksonville, all teams that they handled pretty easily there. On the back of Carrington, who's been their leader in assists. Only reason he's not leading them in scoring is because Blake Hinson's had an unbelievable year, 21.9 points per game, 5 rebounds. But Carrington's been an awesome, versatile threat, triple-double threat every time he goes out on the floor. I think this team's a lot deeper than I gave him credit for in the preview and beginning of the year. They don't have a win that excites me, though, so I don't see enough right now from this team to put them any higher. I do think they'll end up being better than what I think. Florida, in Brooklyn, then Oregon State they did beat as well, but Oregon State's got one of the worst coaching situations right now. Couldn't get Missouri, couldn't beat Clemson in that first ACC matchup. At West Virginia is a big win. Anytime you win what do they call that? The backyard brawl. That's right. Anytime you beat the backyard brawl, that's a good win. And then they beat Kinesis. I always say them wrong, in the MAC. One of the decent teams there. They have a couple of really easy games against South Carolina State and Purdue-Fort Wayne before they play at Syracuse at the end of this month on the 30th. I really like Pitt. I think they're a really deep team, and I think they help the structure of the ACC in that middle tier where I think Pitt is probably better than 10th. Let me be honest about where I have them, but I think they will ultimately show that as the year goes on. And I think even if they don't make the tournament, that middle ground there with some big quad 1, quad 2 wins and even a good record in quad 3 and 4 later in the year hopefully stays the same. I see that being a good thing for the ACC and for Pitt. Number 11, I have Syracuse. Syracuse, coming into the year, was not very high on them. Recapping that, I had them 9th, which I think was even probably a little bit higher than I anticipated because I was lower on Florida State, Pitt. After that, whatever, right? But a lot of people had Syracuse in that top 7, top 5 even. In some cases, had them above teams like Wake Forest, NC State. I just didn't understand it. I didn't see it, and I'm still going to stick to that. I think Judah Mintz is an unbelievable player. Obviously, when you completely change systems, one of the hardest things to do is to follow a really legendary player, a really legendary coach. Obviously, it's the first year in almost 50 years without Jim Boeheim. Autry going to run man defense. They're starting to have to figure things out. Again, these guys who were there last year having to play a little bit differently is obviously a challenge, but they had some games earlier in the year. They had Colgate's a tough opponent there right before they headed to Maui, where they came out with their only win against Chaminade, 105-56. I'm not, going to overreact any of that. They got drummed by Tennessee and Gonzaga. I think the LSU win was really good. I got to see LSU a couple times in the Charleston Classic. I think LSU is better than people think in the SEC. I think it was a really tough team. So I think that win's important there. At Virginia, they lost that one pretty handedly, and then it was a close game against Cornell and at Georgetown. Anytime you play, an old Big East rival, that can't be an easy game. They do have a game in South Dakota against Oregon on the 17th. I think that'll be a strong showing from them. I think that could help their resume a lot. They play Niagara in Syracuse, and then they start ACC play other than the Virginia game earlier in the month. Pitt at Duke, Boston College, at North Carolina, at Pitt. So got a couple of tough games there in January. I think this team's going to figure things out eventually. Talking about Judah Mintz, I think he's been awesome, obviously. Starling, I think, has had a great year as well, passing the ball, playing strong defensively. That's one of the better backcourts in the entire league. I think they got to get Naheem McLeod more involved in the offense. Obviously, he's going to be, leading them in blocks with 2 a game. He's going to obviously be their defensive stalwart, but they need to get him more involved in the rebounding. He should be leading them in rebounding. I know that Taylor has been unbelievable for them. He leads them in rebounding as a guard with 6.2, but they got to get Naheem McLeod more involved. Flying through these, Virginia Tech at 12 feels low, but then you realize Virginia Tech, even with their record being what it is, near the top of the ACC at 7-3, I'm not impressed by really any of it. They beat Coppin State. They lost to South Carolina. That's the games that actually look a little bit better. That was in Charlotte, the second game of the year. They beat Campbell, Wofford. They beat Boise State, which I think that win will age well. They beat Iowa State. Then they lost to Florida Atlantic by 34. They lost at Auburn, and they beat Louisville and Valpo. So other than the Boise State-Iowa State pairing there in Orlando on a neutral court, I like both those wins. Don't get me wrong. I'm just not impressed by Virginia Tech's team. It's really no slight to anything that they're doing specifically. I just think honestly, I think I like the teams ahead of them better. I know that they've got some unbelievable shooters there. Look, at the end of the day, I don't want to sit here and run Virginia Tech through the mud, but I really like what I've seen from Hunter Couture. Sean Padula's been really good as well. Look, they're just not a super exciting team, and they're not a team that I think will be able to sustain the type of success that you would need to beat teams of Boise State and Iowa State's quality, which, again, with the quality of the ACC this year, look, I'm not excited to see how Virginia Tech's going to handle that. I don't think they're super strong defensively, despite what some of the numbers might tell me sometimes. I think they're really reliant on those guards making shots, and I think that's something that will bite them in the tail of it eventually. Last 3 teams here, I have FSU at 13th. FSU, look, coming into the year, I know that when you have a guy like Leonard Hamilton and you think about what he means to the sport and how long he's been in the ACC and at Florida State, we have to still be honest with ourselves and say that he's not on the hot seat. Haven't had a unbelievable run here with Florida State in the last few years. A couple of games on their schedule. That UNLV game early on the 20th of November looks really good now because UNLV beat Creighton last night, albeit in Vegas. But at Florida is a loss. Colorado was a win, and I think that the game, obviously in Daytona, neutral site, I think that game's fine. Lost to Georgia, lost to North Carolina, lost to USF as well. But I do think that they are building something down there in South Florida. Look, I think Florida State is trying to figure out how to gel, and I think that's obviously, regardless of what happened with the football team, look, basketball, is always going to be the second, fiddle sport, and at Florida State. A couple things about their team statistically that stand out to me. Watkins has just been doing everything for them. He leads them in all major statistical categories: points, rebounds, assists. Baba Miller, I think, needs to take a step up offensively. I know that he obviously missed some time last year. I think he's a good talent, but I think this team fits the Leonard Hamilton, where you have guys that are long, athletic, but I don't think that's helping them win games right now with the way the ACC is set up. They don't particularly shoot the three very well, which I think, again, will bite them in the tail. So talking about that earlier, about things that bite teams in the tail. Last two teams, I'll be very brief. Notre Dame at 14. I think Shrewsbury is an unbelievable coach. I really like Kerry Booth, but this team isn't, something to be super excited about. I don't think they're going to help. They're 4-5, which, I think that honestly might be more wins than I think some people projected them coming into the year. Western Carolina isn't a bad loss by any means because that team's really good in the SoCon. They beat Niagara. They beat Oklahoma State in overtime, which I think is an interesting one. They beat Maryland Eastern Shore. They lost at South Carolina, lost at Miami, beat Western Michigan. They lost at Marquette. So they've played some tough games on their schedule, and their ACC start is no different. They're going to play Virginia. They're going to play NC State at Georgia Tech, Florida State at Boston College, and Miami there at the beginning part of January. So Notre Dame, it's not going to get any easier. They start ACC play at home basically 4 straight here, but look, it's year one of Micah Shrewsbury. What can you expect? Last but most certainly not least is our friends in Louisville. The Kenny Payne era should have come to an end last night as soon as that Arkansas State game concluded. At this point, I'm honestly just questioning what they're thinking, what the administration is even thinking, that he, after the Corin Davis thing, I'll be quick on the summary of that. Essentially, he, they came out that he was transferring, then he tweeted that he wasn't, and so Kenny Payne sent out a thing that he said he wanted him to be released or something like that. However that situation ended up happening, and then Davis was actually in the stands in that loss against Arkansas State. The whole thing is just embarrassing. They had that UMBC win on opening night by 1 in the 90s there, so defense was nothing to be excited about. They lost to Chattanooga. They beat Coppin State. Lost to Texas and Indiana in the whatever that classic was in Madison Square Garden. There's a ton of them. Won against New Mexico State in overtime. They beat Bellarmine, crosstown rival nowadays, at least based on how the Cardinals have looked. At Virginia Tech, at DePaul was a huge loss, and then losing to Arkansas State. They played Pepperdine at home on the 17th, and then they play Kentucky. I'm honestly surprised they don't get rid of Kenny Payne going into that Kentucky game, because somebody else should be able to try to figure it out if they even want a chance. That Kentucky game, I saw it on Twitter, it might be opening at like a 25.5-point line, which is ridiculous, and that game is in Louisville. Not that really matters, but the Kenny Payne era should be coming to an end eventually. At this point, the bleeding is already, the fan base is frustrated. The KFC Yum Center looks like a graveyard on game days, and it just has to come to an end. All right, quickly on the Draymond Green suspension, as I'm recording this on Thursday afternoon or evening on the 14th, Draymond Green had an altercation with Jusuf Nurkic the other night in the Suns Warriors game, connected with him near the face area, and this felt like the final straw for the NBA. I think as soon as that was happening, I know that the Twitter police, when something like this happens, I'm not going to sit here and tell you I'm not guilty of it as well. Texts are flying back and forth, tweets about it, whatever, right? But the NBA really came down and struck it hard with the indefinite suspension. Seems like a very similar situation, albeit the circumstances on these two situations are not the same, with Ja Morant and how they handled his, suspension originally, putting him through some kind of counseling or forcing him to. Look, I'm not going to spend forever on this. I obviously want to leave room for the Hassan Ahmad interview, but look, Draymond Green, regardless of what you think about him, when we think about the overall context of his career, right, we're going to think 4-time champion. You're going to think, multiple-time All-Star. You're going to think, and I have it right here in front of me, 4-time All-Star. He was steals champ in 2016-17, 4-time NBA champion, of course, with Steph Curry and Klay Thompson and the Warriors, and 2-time All-NBA player, as crazy as that sounds, which tells me, regardless of where that team finished, without even having to go deep dive into looking into it, like, he is a career 8.7, 6.9, and 5.6 assist player. So 8.7 points, 6.9 rebounds, and 5.6 assists. 44, 31, 71 splits for his career. We obviously know what he means defensively, as he has a Defensive Player of the Year, which I believe should still be on here. Yeah, there it is. 8-time All-Defense, Defensive Player of the Year, and that rounds out his accolades on Basketball Reference. But when you think of the grand scheme of his career, right, we obviously, because of his championships and Defensive Player of the Year, you automatically think Hall of Famer. And I'm not saying that his antics should taint that, but when we think about like the grand scheme of how the Hall of Fame hierarchies work, the NFL Hall of Fame is one of the hardest ones to get into. There's receivers and corners and positions like that were so deep in the middle of 2000s. And a lot of those guys haven't gotten in. Like it took Ty Law of the Patriots as an example, who I've got a bobblehead of right over there on the other side of the desk. It took him for an extra 4 or 5 years to get in, for crying out loud, if I remember correctly. Even if that's not exactly correct. The point is it's deep. The NFL Hall of Fame is really hard to get into, and my point will land and make sense in a second. But the Baseball Hall of Fame, if you do anything that's outside of being a stand-up person or player, you're being discredited and being held out. Like, obviously, you have the extreme examples of the steroids guys like Barry Bonds, who absolutely should have been in the Hall of Fame regardless. He was a Hall of Famer before the steroids. I've always said that, always will. The Pete Rose thing, I get it. Shoeless Joe Jackson, guys like that, right, who cheated. But, look, when you think of the grand scheme of Draymond Green, in 20 years, how are we remembering his career? Are we remembering him as a guy that was so impactful as a Warriors player in the middle 2000s there, where at his peak, I've got it in front of me here, he was first 2 years, 13 minutes a game, 21 minutes a game. And then right when they started to get that stretch, when they turned it around, and he became the starter for them in the forward position. He played 79 games in 2014-15, the year that the Warriors really took off and kind of put themselves on the map. He was 33% from three that year, 44% from the field. He was 66% from the line, but he was 8 rebounds a game, 3.7 assists, 1.6 steals, 1.3 blocks on only 1.7 turnovers a game. With a guy like that at his size, that's really incredible. And almost 12 points a game. He was their facilitator. He was their offensive engine that made the run, right? Steph Curry isn't, when you think of point guard, we know he's an incredible passer, but that is not the way the Warriors system and what made them so dynamic heading into the 3 years where they won the titles, or the handful of years there where they won the titles. Look, he's an incredible player, and I'm going to remember him as that. But when you think of what this suspension means, the way the NBA is handling it is this is the final straw. This is something that cannot continue to happen. And Adam Silver, who has always been viewed as a player's commissioner, look, I'm not telling you any breaking news here, but I'm telling you that this is a monumental moment in Adam Silver's way he handles things, right? Whatever you want to call that, his tenure or whatever you want to call it. But the way he handled this suspension, this is the Warriors, where like the NBA, I almost said the NFL, the NBA needs these guys, and obviously his suspension is going to keep him out potentially until through the Christmas Day games, which is one of the biggest days in the NBA outside the in-season tournament. Christmas Day is a dominant game for them, or a dominant day for them, with 5 games starting at noon, going all the way until midnight the next night, that night. But you're going to keep him out of that potentially. We don't even know, as I'm recording this, what the things he has to do. The meeting with Rich Paul, Warriors ownership and leadership and Draymond Green is going to be tonight, I believe, probably Pacific time. So obviously it'll be tomorrow before we find out what the details of that might look like. But they're putting him in the position where they're keeping out a guy that, albeit when he is playing, he helps the Warriors because of viewership. He helps their team, even though we'll kind of get into the numbers here in just a second, right? But the last couple of years has not been the prettiest for Draymond and what I think of him as a player. But this is a message to Draymond and to the way these things are going to be handled, that Adam Silver's not taking any crap anymore. This is a very David Stern level move. Rest in peace, David Stern. Right, but David Stern didn't play around, right? He was a tough commissioner, and Adam Silver, even though he's viewed as a player's commissioner, he's been a really awesome person in that position in the last few years in some of these decisions with the in-season tournament and the way the All-Star game, even if that was a flop, it was in an attempt to try to make the All-Star game more exciting. That's okay that it failed. It showed you the kind of risk he's willing to take and the kind of leash he's willing to have, and in the case of how he handles suspensions, that John Morant thing, I think they gave him some leeway on the first couple, and then we saw how that ended up, where 25 games, he's still not back. He's going to be back here at the end of this, early this month or later this month, with 25 games happening. But this is a guy who has been one of their most vocal and visual players because of his podcast, because of his, time on TNT, because he's a 4-time champion for one of the most storied franchises in NBA history. This is something that people need to realize. The NBA is taking it seriously, and I'm not saying this is going to blackball them or anything like that. He's not going to be suspended forever, but he, in press conferences, at any time these things happen, he doesn't apologize for them. This isn't a remorseful act. He doesn't feel like he's doing anything wrong, and you see ridiculous takes about how does this speak to Steph Curry's leadership ability and stuff like that. I think that's ridiculous. I think it falls more on Steve Kerr than anything, who when anything in the world happens, he cares to comment. But then when stuff like this happens, he hasn't seen the replay coincidentally and wants to sit here and not make a comment about Draymond's situation, regardless of what we knew about the suspension at the time. My point being is this is a really, really big thing for the Warriors and how they're going to be viewed in the next couple of years, especially by how the NBA is going to handle things, not just on the Warriors side of things, but with the way Draymond looks. And look, they haven't been exactly the best team again this year. I think they're, I'm not going to sit up here and tell you in mid-December that they're done and they're not going to win a championship, but that window's closing. And when you're one of your best players and one of your most intricate defenders over the last 10 years or so is going to be off the floor because of continued antics and ridiculous things like this, I mean, you're going to have to live with the consequences. And again, hammering back to my original point, I'm not here to tell you that it's the right or wrong thing that they did, but we continue time and time again to see these things from a guy like Draymond Green. And there are others like him, right? Obviously, Patrick Beverley has his run-ins with people defensively and technicals and all this kinds of stuff, but there's no place for it in our league where you're intentionally harming guys, whether you think he did it or not. We have enough of a track record there now that I think this is a ridiculous act that cannot continue. And ultimately, regardless of what the stats are going to tell you recently, where since their last title, if you throw the 21 title out the window, if you just going back to the 2017-18 title, 66 games played in 18-19, 43 games in 2019-20, 63 games in 2021, 46 games played, in the year they won the title. Like, they won a title without him playing an intricate, level of basketball where he wasn't this standout player, 7.5 points a game, up to 3 turnovers a game. He's essentially increased his turnover number consistently since those first couple of titles. Lower steals that year, lower in blocks, but yet they were still able to win a championship. Look, at the end of the day, right, and that was actually the wrong year. I'm looking at the years that the way Basketball Reference has it marked, I think that's probably his all-star years. But regardless, if you're looking back, the timeline still fits. Look, this isn't a guy that is exactly going to have the leeway of a Giannis Antetokounmpo if he did something stupid like this, who's a multiple-time MVP and one of the faces of the NBA. Draymond Green has a shorter leash, even though on the floor it seems like he doesn't with referees and stuff like that. But the shorter leash in regards to this isn't some standout all-star player anymore. And he is obviously reaching the point in his career, I think, where he's not as impactful as a player. And we're seeing that statistically. And again, hammering back to what I said earlier, I think the NBA did the right thing and they put their foot down, and deservingly so.